You today, you don't get just one preacher, you get 5. I know. So exciting. So before we get into our text and topic for today, I think it's important for the people of First Pres Berkeley to get to know their preachers just a little bit. So if you could briefly introduce yourselves, tell us where you live and the church you are serving at, and maybe one thing your city is known for.
Can you start?
Yeah.
My name is Tara Bulger, and if the accent didn't give it away, I'm from North Carolina. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina. And if there is one thing that my city or church is known for, is that Raleigh is the capital of North Carolina, and our church is right across the street from the historic capital. And so it has this long history of answering the question of how do we live out this faith in the public square and in how we live our lives in that kind of way.
I'm Rebecca Abel Lamar, and I'm the pastor at Government Street Presbyterian Church, which is in Mobile, Alabama. Mobile is a port city, and the thing that folks in my congregation would want you to know about Mobile, especially this time of year, is that it is the birthplace of Mardi Gras celebrations in the United States. Don't go to Mobile and tell them you think it started in New Orleans. They don't take it well.
James.
But the parades just started this weekend before I came here, so they are ready to go. We're thrilled to be here.
I'm Cater Howard. I'm the pastor of First Presbyterian Church in Stillwater, Minnesota. We are 30 minutes east of Minneapolis, right on the St. Croix River, across the river from Wisconsin. Stillwater is known as the birthplace of Minnesota. It's a city of about 18,000. If you look on Wikipedia, you'd also know that we invented the pop-up toaster.
I should have gone before you, Cater. I don't know how you top the pop-up.
I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. I know what that is. I thought it was a toaster that pops up. Okay.
Words matter, don't they,
Yeah,
Charlotte?
they do really matter.
My name is Alan Dyer. I'm the senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Spartanburg, South Carolina. That's upstate South Carolina, right in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Spartanburg is known as the hub city. There's a lot of reasons for that, but we have railroads that have existed for over 100 years, moving goods and people from all across the southeast. We are a textile town historically, and that is an industry that still exists in some form, but like so many industries has undergone all sorts of transformation, particularly in the latter half of the 20th century. And so a lot of our industry, a lot of our population has had to reinvent how we go about as a community. And there's lots of interesting and creative ways that has happened, but I'm reminded of the hub city part of our town about 4 times every day when a giant train moves right through my backyard. So it is still very much the hub city for so many.
Quick show of hands, how many of you were not born in the state of California? Wow. Wow, I'm actually really surprised by that. So what a gift to have our siblings and neighbors outside of California to be joining us today. Now, as I said earlier, we have been meeting for 3 years along with Anne Marie, Tom Toole, our friends Brian and Brad who are coming in tonight to talk about what it means to be faithful preachers in this modern time. And actually, the creation of our group was not the dream or the vision of a bunch of preachers. It was actually 2 individuals who sit in the pews like you every Sunday, who saw the importance and the need of good, responsible evangelism. Because they also saw how in the world, how powerful, harmful, destructive, and manipulative evangelism can be as well. And so for all of us who, for all intents and purposes, are professional evangelizers, what is your understanding of this hot button word? And what do you hope to do every time you get in the pulpit on a Sunday?
So I think the thing I always try to remember is that in the first century, that Greek word euangelion, which means good news, was often aligned with the empire, right? Often the good news came from the Roman Empire, and a lot of times it was coercive. And so I try to remember that its usage in the context of our faith should always be subversive and turn those systems upside down. For me, there are two things I think I try to do with evangelism. One is the Sri Lankan theologian D.T. Niles said that all evangelism is one beggar showing another beggar where to find bread. And I have found sustenance in my faith in Jesus Christ, and I want to be able to share that with others. When it comes to getting into the pulpit every week, I think my job is to tell the truth about the world, to tell the truth about who we are, and to tell the truth about who Jesus Christ is. And I think always putting language to that is our first job as evangelists, whether we're in the pulpit or in the pew.
Amen. Who's next?
I was thinking about that question ahead of time, and I was particularly remembering an experience we had in our congregation earlier this year with a scholar named Dr. Andy Root, who's actually a colleague of Cater's spouse at Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Andy came, and a lot of what he talked with us about was the centrality of story. How story has been at the very heart of what it means to be a follower and disciple of Jesus Christ from the very earliest days of the faith. And Jesus himself, as we heard in our scripture today, is ultimately a teller of God's story. And so what Andy invited us as a congregation to begin thinking about and working on is where and how are we telling the story of the living God at work? In our own lives, yes, but also in the life of our church and our community. And it's a reframing, right? It's a reframing for me of thinking about what evangelism is. It is how are we living out that story? How are we showing God's love? And how are we noticing God's love showing up in the lives and in the faith of neighbors, particularly neighbors who may not share our own faith tradition, neighbors who may not live in the neighborhoods that we do. How are we noticing and hearing and then going out and sharing those stories of where the living God is at work all around us every day?
I love that.
And for me, the preaching doesn't stand alone. It's incredibly connected to what we do the rest of the week. And so when I'm in the pulpit, I'm trying to help people connect to that and connect to the ways that our church and our neighbors have been active in the community that week, and how we are invited to participate in God's transformation of the community and of the world. And that, I think that's the good news. The good news is we are invited to be a part of that, and that we can find transformation as well in that. So it should never stand alone. It should never be coercive. It should always be an invitation.
Amen.
When I think about what I'm trying to do when I get into the pulpit, I think about the reason behind our evangelism, whatever we mean by that word. And my reason for getting up in the pulpit and doing what I do is gratitude. And I think so much of the harmful evangelism that we see is from a place of fear of, if I don't do this, something bad, I won't be doing enough. God won't be pleased with me if I don't get other people to believe the same thing. And what I love about our Presbyterian theology is there's nothing more we can do for God to love us more. There's nothing less we do that makes God love us less. And so everything we do, that sharing, that come and see, is out of gratitude, which is a very different starting place for evangelism.
Yeah. So I hope I'm not proof texting our passage for today, but I do think that everything that you all just said lines up with the example that we get in John 1 when Jesus calls his first disciples. I mean, he doesn't come out swinging with these threats, right? It's not coercive of if or else. Believe this, you must accept this to follow me. It is very much, I mean, it's a refrain. It's a liturgical refrain. What is it? Come and see. And it's so compelling that Philip repeats it just verses later to Nathanael, our skeptic, right? What good can come out? He says, come and see, come and see. So how do you think the church has done historically on following Jesus' example, following Philip's example of the come and see model?
I think to follow Jesus' example means we have to do more than just say the right words, But Jesus says very few words. It's his presence that is compelling, that makes people want to follow. But as Christians, that is really hard work to make our presence so Christ-like because our life of faith is so deep within us that people want to follow Jesus Christ. And so I think the harmful evangelism is often a shortcut, which fear is a motivator. We can get people to do what we want if we make them afraid. And so fear, at its best, I think, is a lazy form of evangelism. And at its worst is just power-grabbing manipulation. And so the church has not always done great. I mean, there are certainly times that we see the church has done that well, but it takes constant work. But there are a lot of times that the church needs to be repenting for the ways we have been lazy with our evangelism, the ways we have used fear and coercion as a shortcut.
I also love that come and see, to me, it's not the words. Jesus is inviting them into relationship. I think that's the best evangelism is always done in relationship. Like Cater was talking about, I may stand up and be the one who preaches every Sunday, but that's predicated on all the relationships I've formed with the people I care about. And y'all, relationships are hard, right? I mean, they're filled with people, and they're just really tough sometimes. But I think what Jesus is saying is that in his love, he's willing to let someone walk alongside him, and he will walk alongside them, and that they will learn. And evangelism has been done so terribly over the years, and I can't defend it, and it troubles me greatly. I've lived my entire life in the South. My churches were on the wrong side of slavery and the civil rights movement, or slow to come around. And we are really, I'm at First Presbyterian Church of Raleigh. I've been there a year, and we're starting to ask the question of how do we get back into relationship with our community in order to really share where we found bread and why it matters. I think evangelism is really answering the so what question. So what? What does it matter? Why are you doing this?
Okay, before the two of you answer, let me add an edge to it. So we kind of know the very obvious forms of negative evangelism. What are the more insidious things that we have seen in the church that have been covered over, papered over by Scripture, right? Go make disciples of all nations. These wonderful mandates that have then been kind of co-opted in a more coercive way. Does that make sense?
So what are they?
Yeah, let's call them out, right? Let's not just say, ooh, evangelism bad. How have we seen it slide in to even things that we feel that, across the board, Christians can agree, yeah, Jesus said this, Jesus was about this, but then the church has gone and done this.
Unfortunately, I mean, there's so many examples, and so many in international mission as well, and just going into other countries, and often violently, and trying to make Christians of people. And unfortunately, I don't need to go over all that history, but I think we have some of those same tendencies in our mission today, and kind of a colonial mindset. I think right now the National Presbyterian Church is trying to own up to that and change the way that we are in mission partnership. So it's not as colonial. It's more true partnership.
Yeah.
I think in my context in Minnesota, we have a lot of folks I've met whose parents and grandparents were taken from their homes in the Indian schools in Minnesota, and really terrible legacy there. And that was an attempt to Christianize and instill culture from the tribes in Minnesota, in that part of the United States. So I think of that as well.
Yeah.
I would just say underneath a lot of it, I think, are just the church's tendency to assume we know other people's stories, to assume, because I was even thinking your example of barbecue. You go to South Carolina and say Berkeley, California, and their assumptions, right?
All good, of course.
All good. Just as when you all hear I'm from South Carolina, you're like, oh. But I think part of the work of the church, part of the work of evangelism is laying aside some of our assumptions. And to do that, we have to actually show up and to be in front of people who may have very different stories than our own. For me to be able to have this experience, to be with this incredible community of faithful, questioning believers, and to be able to take this back into a pulpit 7 days from now, and to be able to share some of what I encountered in the story of First Presbyterian Berkeley and in the people who I met in this community and in this area. I think that is one way we evangelize and for other people to get to know my story as well.
Yeah.
I think part of our work, part of the edge, and part of the thing that is so hard for us to do is to set aside some of our assumptions. And the work of evangelism is actually taking the time to sit in front of someone and to listen.
You know, when you first asked that question, I thought, you know, my church is really comfortable, like a lot of churches, evangelizing if you look like them and you come from the same background as them. Our churches all tend to look the same for the most part. And so I think there's something about having the opportunity to get to know people who are outside of your context is where the best evangelism happens.
So Padre Gotuma was with us this past week, Thursday and Friday. And Peter, I think you asked a question about how he reconciles some really hard texts being in Scripture. And his answer was about how we can't erase those parts of Scripture. It shows us where we've come from, how we've evolved, maybe even where we will return to, as you know, that we have this really wonderful cycle as human beings to return to some pretty unjust places. And so I think one of the things that to kind of play off of what you were talking about is how oftentimes in our really intense desire for purity, Christian evangelism will strive to erase. And so we see that in cultural erasure, whereas Jesus calls for cultural transformation, right? So, I mean, I think it's so fascinating that Philip doesn't scold Nathanael for his insulting comment. I mean, that is coming from his lived experience, and then Philip's like, no, let you come and see, and you'll figure out. And so one of my favorite things is to talk about my great-grandfather, who was one of the first Presbyterian ministers in Korea before it was divided, and how Western missionaries came and they tried to evangelize a Christianity that was devoid of Korean culture. And my great-grandfather said, no, that can't be, right? And so it's confusing this notion of the gospel with my version, my shade, my experience of the gospel, right? If it is not good news to the person hearing it, but it is to you, like how do we bridge that tension and that divide? Okay, so from where you are sitting in your context, and you guys have all named various pieces of it, thank you so much. How are you seeing good evangelism being played out and lived out in your congregations, or not even necessarily in your congregations, but in your communities?
You may have heard about our community on the news. I don't need to tell you what all is going on there in Minnesota and Minneapolis, and it's not just Minneapolis, it's in every small community within 100 miles of Minneapolis. It's happening in my community. I think it's been a good reminder for us that evangelism is loving your neighbor, and that's the heart of the gospel. And if you don't love your neighbor, you're not really loving God. And if you don't love your neighbor, you're not truly following Jesus. And you can't just love your neighbor in your heart. It's not a feeling. You have to love your neighbor by bringing them food, by making sure that ICE is not following you when you drive to their house, by turning off your location services. And this is not a joke. By eating the piece of paper with their address on it if you get pulled over by ICE. And I have a teacher in my church who's had to do that. Loving your neighbor is blowing whistles to keep them safe. the first time we had a constitutional observer training, 10% of my congregation showed up for the first one. We had 30 people trained. We have about 300 members, and it was amazing. We do this event every 6 months. It's really designed to help families in homelessness, and we get a lot of immigrant families, and we've had as many as 400, and we were terrified that they were going to show up and it was going to be a target for ICE. And so I had 12 church members patrolling the parking lot. I had with whistles. It was minus 10 degrees, and I had members out front guarding the front doors, driving. They were on a stakeout in their car. It was just things that I never imagined we'd be doing. But that's how we love our neighbors, and I think that's how we share the good news that is part of the gospel. You've all heard about these infamous signal chats. And I saw somebody ask a question about something at First Presbyterian Stillwater, and some other community member said, "Oh yeah, they'll be good. They're helpers." And so right there, I knew that we were evangelizing, that the community knew that we were a safe place. Mm.
In our community back in 2018, there was a study done by a local college that I mentioned the hub city, and you've heard the phrase on the other side of the tracks. That's very real in many communities, but particularly in the Southeast. And it identified that almost 50% of children in Spartanburg County were living in poverty, that you were 3 times as likely to be living in poverty if you were black versus white. And our congregation, along with 6 other congregations in our community, wrote a statement that included the line that racism and poverty are an offense to God. And together, those churches have led an effort that is called the Faith Initiative to End Child Poverty, that has attracted attention from communities around the Southeast and beyond for the ways that we seek to model cooperative ministry, for the ways that we seek to bring together our resources, whether that's financial, whether that's people, whether that's legal, whatever gifts, to be able to come together and seek to address the underlying issues of racism and poverty, to do the educational piece, but also to do the practical piece in the hopes of ending child poverty, which is quite an aspirational goal. And yet it has been something that has been one of the most powerful things that I've had an opportunity to be in ministry with others about, where we are going into communities, identifying communities that many people ignored or never even knew existed. There's a community just outside my town called Mayo. That's as good a southern town name as you can get, Mayo, South Carolina. And we identified 100% of children in Mayo, South Carolina were living in poverty. Mm. And that community has now rallied through social workers in schools, through pastors and churches in that community, seeking to learn the stories, to set aside assumptions, and to find the ways that we can, as people of faith, evangelize, share the good news without ever having to open a Bible verse or ask for something in return, but to simply be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ, seeking to go towards those and to share the good news, to invite them to come and see, both those who serve and those who are receiving care.
One of the things I love about my church is that we have a dedicated ministry that helps the working poor in our county. It's the only organization that does this, that helps them with rent, utilities, and that sort of thing, which is hugely important. But the part that I love about it is that they also intentionally focus on hospitality when that person comes to us. So they're invited in, they have a seat, someone has a conversation that starts with, "How are you?" We get them something to drink. And so that kind of hospitality, I think, is probably as important as any sort of check we're ever going to cut. And we help over 1,000 families a year out of our, one of our office buildings on our campus. And I think that's hugely important and really gives us the heart of our identity as a church.
Government Street Presbyterian has done a lot of ministry in downtown Mobile, but one of the things that we are doing right now that I am loving and excited about is we have a program with the local synagogue and the Baptist church down the street. talking about evangelism and how so often we try to make people be like us, not just hear about the good news, but hear about good news as we have received it and practice their faith in the way that we have practiced it. Part of doing that differently is just hearing different perspectives. And so we have a monthly interfaith Bible study with our friends from the temple, our Baptist friends. We rotate where we have it. We do an interfaith Thanksgiving service. We preach in each other's pulpits once a year. And part of what I've seen in our congregants who are so faithful in attending that Bible study is just they are more thoughtful about how they interpret Scripture. They are more thoughtful about the assumptions that they make because they adore the rabbi and the congregants from his congregation. And so they want to be thoughtful and careful, and they ask good questions. And I think sometimes we need a place to practice that. Where can we ask good, faithful questions instead of assuming? And for us, it has been that. There is so much assumed Christianity in the South that to remove that assumption has been a great practice for us. And we've built those relationships that we've talked about, not for the purpose of conversion at all, but for the purpose of understanding and understanding that getting to know our Jewish neighbors has made us better Christians. And it has just been a true blessing.
So I think one of the greatest misconceptions of evangelism is that it's a solo activity, like one person doing a thing, saying a thing, standing up in a pulpit to another person. I think if Minneapolis is showing us anything, is that we utterly cannot do any of this on our own. And so it requires the partnership and the friendship, really. I mean, we use the word partnership a lot, but I think probably, hopefully, the more accurate word is friendship, is what is enabling real meaningful change that is in line with the gospel to take place. And so thank you for being friends to this congregation. Even though this is the first time you are meeting them all, trust that they have found ways to influence and inspire and support what is happening here. So thank you so much.